If you're able to play basic triads like major and minor chords, seventh chords are the natural next step to expand your chord repertoire. As suggested by the name, triads contain 3 notes, often the root, third and fifth of a chord, and sevenths just continue that trend one interval further to add a little bit more depth to the sound. Now, different combinations of intervals can create different types of seventh chords, and this can cause a lot of confusion, so I'm going to take you through all the main ones in this video and eradicate any uncertainty that you might have about seventh chords. This is part of my intermediate theory course, which is linked below in the description, and I just want to note that I'm not going to be taking you through specific guitar shapes in this video. This one is more about the theory behind building seventh chords and what they sound like and how they fit in a key, although I am working on a separate seventh chord series for guitar where I'll teach you all the shapes and a bunch of songs to put them into practice, so I'll link that below when it's ready also. Although for now you can access some more information and all the chord diagrams via my Patreon page, which is also linked in the description. Anyway, for now, let's dive into the theory. So we know that a major chord is a root, a major third and a perfect fifth, and a minor chord is a root, a minor third and a perfect fifth. Now for this first set of sevenths, we're going to keep the root and fifth as they are, but continue combining them with one of the thirds, either major or minor, and add one of the sevenths on top, which could also be a major or minor. So this leaves us with 4 possible outcomes. We're going to start with the easy ones, so if we take a major chord and add a major 7 to it, we'll have root, major third, perfect fifth and major 7th. This would give us a major 7th chord. And if we take a minor chord and add a minor 7th to it, so root, minor third, perfect fifth, minor 7th, then we'd have a minor 7th chord. So all the major options give us a major 7 and all the minors give us a minor 7. Some confusion gets caused by the fact that the major 7th interval is included in a major 7th chord and a minor 7th interval is included in a minor 7th chord, so the full chord and the individual interval have the same name, but you'll generally know by the context which one is being talked about. So what about combining minor and major intervals? Well, one option is very common and one is very rare. So we'll start with the common one, which is a major chord combined with a minor 7 on top. So root, major third, perfect fifth and minor 7. And this gives us a dominant 7th chord. That's its full name, the dominant 7th, but if you just see 7 on a chord diagram, for example A7, then this is the chord that's being signified. And the final option would be a minor chord with a major 7th added, so root, minor third, perfect fifth and major 7. Now this one is very inventively named the minor major 7, so very much has a does what it says on the tin style chord name. And as mentioned, this one is very rare, but I bet you've heard it before and you'll find out why in just a second. So you can avoid a lot of the uncertainty about these chords just by mastering what intervals are in each of these types of sevenths. And one final pitfall to avoid is getting the major and dominant sevenths mixed up. They both contain a major third, so they're both fundamentally major type chords, but the major 7th chord contains a major 7th interval and the dominant 7th chord contains a minor 7th interval. So they definitely can't be used interchangeably, and if you use the wrong one in a song, it'll sound really bad. So the major 7 is always signified by an MAJ7, or it could be a capital M7, or sometimes even a little triangle. Students often find it helpful to see this information in the form of a grid, so I'm going to show you that now while I demonstrate what these chords actually sound like, because after all, the reason that we're learning them is to make use of the different sound qualities that they offer. Now, I'm going to explain how I interpret the sound of each chord, but definitely make your own personal judgments so you can really get the sound of each one in your own head, and I'm going to show you some musical examples to help with this also. So remember, we're keeping the root and fifth planted in place, then we'll put our options for thirds along the top and 7ths down the side. So we're going to start with the dominant 7 because it's so common, which combines a major third with a minor 7, and that sounds like this. To me, this chord sounds kinda surprised and a bit tense. It's often used to create tension, which can then be resolved, but it still sounds kinda happy and upbeat because of the major third. It's a very bluesy chord, so here's a quick example of a chunka chunka style blues using all dominant 7ths. If we now turn that minor 7 into a major 7, we get the major 7th chord, which sounds like this. To me, this chord sounds sort of posh and fancy and expensive. It's always fun trying to come up with words to describe sounds, but it's less bluesy than the dominant and more jazzy. However, it still crops up quite a bit in popular music. My favourite example of this is Under the Bridge by Red Hot Chili Peppers, where Frusciante just lets that major 7th chord ring out at the end of the phrase. It fits the song perfectly and that major 7 character comes through really clearly. Next, if we combine the two minor intervals, we get the minor 7th chord, which sounds like this. To my ears, the minor 7th dampens the sadness or dreariness of a standard minor chord. It brightens the tone slightly and sounds a bit more kind of cool and relaxed rather than purely melancholic. You're free to disagree, of course, but regarding examples, it's super common in funk, so you'll see a lot of these chords in my Nile Rodgers lesson series, for example. But it's also that common chord found at the start of songs like Wonderwall and Wish You Were Here, which is actually an E minor 7. So I think that's quite a good reference, and I'll show you it here played without the capo. And finally, we've got the rare but not forgotten minor major 7, which, as you know by the name, is a minor triad with a major 7th added, and that sounds like this. I said earlier you might recognise it, hopefully you do now. This chord is of course known by me and many other musicians as the James Bond chord. So the chords we've looked at so far are a really important set of 7th chords, and before we go any further I want to introduce the idea of combining the 7th and sus elements of a chord. For example, if we look at an A chord which contains A, C sharp and E, we could add a G on top to make it an A7, or we could just change the C sharp to a D to get an A sus4. So if we make both of these changes together, we then call this chord A7 sus4. The 7ths and susses don't interfere with one another, so you can easily combine the two in the same chord, further expanding your palette of sounds. And speaking of expanding the palette, we can also alter the 5th, which offers more flavours when it comes to 7ths. Now I want to mention this because it relates to the diminished chord that was mentioned in the chords and keys video earlier in the series. So the way this works is if we take a minor triad and flatten the 5th by 1 semitone, we get that clashy diminished 5th interval, which turns the chord into a diminished triad. If we then add a minor 7th to that, we get a minor 7 flat 5 chord, so another does what it says on the tin style name. And this is the chord which lands on the 7th degree of a major scale, so for example in the key of C you'd get a B minor 7 flat 5, which sounds like this. It's a bit tense, so you can hear why it isn't used as often as the other chords in a key. Now, here's the really confusing bit, so just bear with me on this. This chord is also known as half diminished because the 5th is diminished but the 7th isn't. It's just a minor 7. For a full diminished 7th chord, we have to flatten the 7th a further semitone, which actually means it sounds the same as a major 6th. We just still refer to it as a 7th because of the conventions of chord building. So a full diminished 7th chord is root, minor 3rd, diminished 5th or flat 5, and diminished 7th or double flat 7. And this chord is super tense. It's often used to create suspense in films like this. And if we do a similar thing with major and sharpen the 5th, we'd call that interval an augmented 5th, which gives us an augmented chord. And if we then add a minor 7th to this, we'd have root, major 3rd, augmented 5th and minor 7th, giving us an augmented 7th chord, which sounds like this. So those are some of the chords that you're more likely to come across, but obviously there are more potential interval combinations, so you might discover even more chords as you explore more music, and then it's just a case of trying to remember first of all the ones that are really useful, but also the ones that you like the sound of the most. We'll finish off now by looking at how seventh chords fit into a key. Do check out the previous chords in a key video in this series if you're unfamiliar with this idea, because it's very much going to follow on from that. So our major key chords were major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. Those are our 7 degrees in triad form, but now we're going to add the sevenths. So these are the seventh chords that occur naturally when you combine the root, third, fifth, and seventh, starting from each degree of a major scale. And the minor chords are probably the easiest place to start because they all just become minor sevenths. So that covers the second, third, and sixth degrees. Next, we'll look at the first degree, the root chord, and the fourth degree, which both become major sevenths, and that leaves just one remaining major chord, the fifth degree, which becomes a dominant seventh, and the only natural dominant seventh in a key, hence the fifth degree is sometimes referred to as the dominant. And finally, as mentioned before, we've got that cheeky minor 7 flat 5 or half diminished chord up on the 7th degree, more commonly used in jazz but still crops up a bit in more popular styles, so worth adding it in and knowing the whole set. So to round up, I'll take you through the 7th chords in the key of G on guitar so you can see and hear them in sequence. Remember, keep an eye out for the 7th chord series for lessons on these specific shapes, but we're going to start with our root chord, which is G major 7. Then the 2 chord is A minor 7. The 3 chord is B minor 7. The 4 chord is C major 7. The 5 chord is D7 or D dominant 7. The 6 chord is E minor 7. The 7 chord is F sharp half diminished or F sharp minor 7 flat 5. And then we can resolve on our root chord of G major 7 an octave higher. And once again, just the chords in order so you can hear them. So whatever instrument you play, give this a go. Try and play all the 7th chords in a few different keys and keep your ears open to make sure that they all sound like they're fitting together, and then you'll have the pattern nailed. Hopefully you're now able to really get your head around 7th chords and bypass all of that confusion surrounding them. There are a few more topics I want to touch on in this theory course, so remember you can access the full thing via the link in the description, and I'll also pop the link to the 7th chord guitar lessons there when those are ready also, but for now you can get some more information and chord diagrams via my Patreon page. Alongside that, there's plenty more guitar content on the channel, so be sure to subscribe for more and give this video a like if you found it helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.